Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So here we are with the next, we'll call it a trilogy, it isn't really, but we're going to pretend because it's 3 volumes in one book. So I'm calling The World According to Dave Barry a trilogy because there were a lot of other trilogies and tetralogies and stuff that I could have done, but I just didn't feel like reading them. Because the thing is that before I do each of these videos, I have to actually settle down and reread the book so that I can, dredge up memories of reading it and remember what's actually in it and not confuse Dave Barry Talks Back with Dave Barry's Greatest Hits with Dave Barry is not making this up with any other book. So we have this particular so-called omnibus, which the publishers decided for their own reasons to put Dave Barry Talks Back, Dave Barry Turns 40, and Dave Barry's Greatest Hits into a single volume for reasons, I guess. Anyway, so we have this cover, which is exactly the kind of cover that in a completely different book Mr. Barry complains about. We're trying to make you look wacky because you're a humor columnist and humor columnists are wacky. So we have this on the back cover with, the usual sorts of quotes that people put on books to try to convince you to buy them. Anyways, so the first book, Dave Barry Talks Back, which I am pulling out the regular cover just so that we have, that distinguishing factor. This one is just a collection of columns. I've said it before, Dave Barry has kind of like 3 kinds of books that he does. He has the books that are that are like this, collections of columns. You have the book that I have scheduled for next week, Dave Barry Turns 40, which is that particular book. I'm not certain you can trace it back to a single column. By the way, all the throat clearing is because, shockingly, I'm having sort of an allergy cold thing, so I keep on finding myself with postnasal drip, which, if you don't know what that is, that's what makes you cough when you have a cold, which is why you should blow your nose when you've got a cold instead of sniffling right behind people who are trying to do things and who, when they offer you a Kleenex tissue paper, turn it down and then give an almighty snork, because goodness knows that's more pleasant than listening to you blow your nose once and then not again for a while. Anyways, so putting aside my particular soapbox about people who apparently don't understand postnasal drip, and I have lung issues, so postnasal drip is a thing for me. Anyways, so Dave Barry Talks Back, that's collections. That's a collection of his columns from the Miami Herald, which is where he worked for most of his career. Like I was saying, Dave Barry Turns 40, that's one of his books about a single topic where he wrote a whole book. You can, if you look, backtrace that book, the same as Dave Barry in Cyberspace or Dave Barry's Guide to Guys. These are books that if you look, you can in fact usually backtrace them to a particular column. I think Dave Barry Turns 40 is more a collection of columns that he sort of expanded, but either way, we'll get there when we get there. The last kind of book that he does is his novels, which I'm probably not going to do a lot on. It's not that I dislike them. It's, again, I have to be in a mood to read a particular book for this series, so for this channel. So there are books that I really, really liked, and I continue to like them. I just haven't felt like rereading them, and since this is my fun hobby, I'm not going to force myself to. So, the other thing in this book, aside from his columns, is is cartoons by Jeff McAnally, who is the guy who did the Shoe Saturday paper cartoons. So you should look up Opus the Penguin and or Shoe and Jeff McAnally and look it up, because they were fairly popular. So this particular picture, because this book has illustrations, cartoons by Jeff McAnally, this one is from the opening column, in which Dave Barry talks about writing humor and what it's like and why it's hard and things like that. And one of his hints was that Weasel is always funny. So we have this particular humor tip, which is that the word weasel is always funny, and that's true. There are certain words, like weasel, most of those words involve K's and W's that are just sort of fundamentally, endemically funny. And it's just something fundamental to the shape of the word and its place in the language. And of course, also, we as Anglophones, because I assume those who are listening to this are people who speak English, there are certain shapes of words, culturally, but also within the context of the language, that just sound silly based on words that we have for concepts that are silly. So it is kind of, it is a bit of a thing to do with the quality, with the, with writing funny dialogue, with writing funny columns or anything else, that word choice of something like weasel, it's very specific, because the word itself is fundamentally funny and adds a quality to the sentence that will make something funnier than it would be if you used a different word. This is also, by the way, the book that has one of my favorite shticks. One of my favorite columns that were in a way written by his readers. It's a thing that a lot of people do. You find it with YouTubers. I'm thinking offhand of one Minecraft YouTuber who very frequently, who with relative regularity, will go onto his server and ask a bunch of his fans at random to build stuff for him, and then they build things. And it means he doesn't have to go to the effort of building. It means that his video for that particular week or that particular release is the bulk of the work of making the visuals for the video has been done by other people, and all he has to do is commentate. It's a really, really great boon to, that's why you have call-in shows, because you don't need to do a lot of work for that. You just need somebody sitting there at a phone, somebody to handle the switchboard, and then you ask people to call in and talk about the hockey game last night, and you'll have a bunch of people who are perfectly happy to call in and talk about the hockey game last night. So you can get a whole show out of this. Dave Barry does a similar thing where he writes his columns. The Book of Bad Songs came out of one of those columns, where he wrote a column about songs that he disliked, and a bunch of people reacted to this both positively and negatively. And so then he said, well, I'm going to put out a poll. What do you think the worst song is? And he got 2 columns out of that. In this case, he has a couple of columns, one of which was about taxes and taxing people, and the other of which was about the national insect. And I kind of really, really always loved the national insect one, because it's just so ridiculous. In particular, I love the bit where he's talking about, all of the various votes people made for the national insect, which included a dead bug named Hector that was actually mailed to him. my vote for the American national insect remains with Hector the bug. Um, so this is from one of his series of columns that are based on articles sent in by alert readers, because of course people would send him in articles of weird stuff they had seen, and he could usually get a column out of this. Again, it's the kind of thing that if you're smart and if you're having to do a column week after week after week after week, you use it. And so it just proved his talents that he was able to find these columns. In this particular case, it was a column in which people had told him about a giant loggerhead turtle somewhere off the coast of Florida that had apparently been trying to mate with humans. It had probably become disoriented in some way. Anyways, the Bugs for Money one, that was a column that became two things. The first one was that he threw out the Bugs for Money concept, because the Arbitron was like the Nielsen ratings, where you were supposed to sit down in front of your television and, for Nielsen, keep track all week of what it was you actually watched. And of course, as he puts it, a lot of people probably lied on the Nielsen ratings, because you don't want people to know that you are watching, as he suggests here, Bugs for Money. The idea that he had, of course, being a program where people would say, I will eat this bug for X amount of money, and whoever suggested the lowest amount of money would actually have to do it. So you have, that one got a second spin-off of people saying bugs that they would eat for how much money. I just really, really like this cartoon. This was, of course, Dave Barry talking about Halloween and what it's like as an adult at Halloween as compared to when you were a kid and you thought knocking over mailboxes was funny. And now that you're an adult, you understand exactly how aggravating it is, and that it's probably the universe paying you back for all the mailboxes you knocked over. But I just really, really like this cartoon, which is of two children one is wearing a George Bush Sr. mask, and the other one, I think that's Ross Perot. I wasn't really all that politically aware in the 80s, given that I didn't turn 10 until 1992. So, my finer point grasp on these things isn't all there, but the idea of being greeted at the door by two children wearing those masks is, I thought that was just a delightful cartoon. So the last one that I picked, Bethman and Robert Battle the Spider People, Bill and Bernice. Here Dave Barry is doing one of those bits that he does where he's just talking about his life, which includes that sometimes, his wife says, there are giant spiders in the doorway, I expect you to clear them out. And so Dave gets delegated the task of clearing the spiders out, and he's kind of scared of spiders, not shockingly. But he decides to name them Bill and Bernice, and sets out on this dramatic journey to get rid of them. And it's this wonderful little moment that, again, it falls under the auspices of it falls under the auspices of Dave Barry's realism, of the fact that he has these moments and you recognize it. You recognize seeing that giant scary spider that you're vaguely aware is probably going to try to murder you. And the fact that you kind of have to, and the way you suck it up and deal with it. So that's everything that I'm going to say about this book, and I will talk to you about the next book in the omnibus edition next week.